I'm here with Bernard Geheb and Nicholas Godman at the European Commission, and they are our contact people here for the Landscapes for Our Future programme, and also an integral part of our programme implementation, source of inspiration and encouragement and debate. So, Bernard, the session yesterday, what were your key takeaways from the session?
My key takeaways first, I would say that the power of these landscape approaches. We could see how they really unlock development processes in different places. It was amazing to see the diversity of perspectives on it, obviously reflecting the diversity of contexts we have in these different countries, and the different objectives people put on these territories. So that's this diversity was fascinating. And the method, the integrated landscape management approach, is a way to get these different perspectives working together.
Excellent. Yeah. Nicholas?
I think really the emphasis on people. Without getting people on board, we will not be able to, achieve the kind of goals that we set out originally for the landscape. It will really not happen if we don't get to have everyone sitting around the same table, the same virtual table, if you will, and agree on some of the basic, visions for what is going to be done in the landscape, and to really also, I think, in a way, accept that this will be a hard process, right? It's not an easy process. Sometimes we tend to think quite linear also, from A to B. We have a plan, we want to go through with it, and this is what the outcomes are going to be. Sometimes I think we need to be more conscious also about the fact that we will have to go to back to the drawing board at some point with the input that we're receiving from everyone who is involved. Yeah. And by everyone being involved, I mean, of course, making sure so that everyone who needs to have a voice is there, and taking that feedback in a manner that we're taking it seriously, honestly engaging with it, and that we're then going to adjust in order to then finally have an outcome that benefits everyone involved and everything involved.
And do either of you think that for your colleagues who were participating in the session, do you feel that the takeaways were similar, or did you hear other interesting reactions from the participants?
I think there was a general excitement about it. Because our colleagues, I don't want to make a blanket assessment, but I think a lot of colleagues, they are wanting to engage in that way. They simply have not potentially been exposed to the right methods to do it.
Right.
And I think yesterday's session really managed to touch upon some of those ways that people can at least get started with finding the right ways to engage in the landscape. Some of the tools, and I think something I'd like to pick up on as well that you mentioned, was to find the right roles, to also make sure that the negotiation process, or the deliberation as you called it, is carried out in a way that we're utilizing the right skills in order to create the best possible outcomes. And I think that that is something where I saw the most heads turn and the most eyes opening, because we tend to bring the same kind of experts around the table to think about how we're going to carry out projects in the climate space, in the environmental space, in the human rights space. But we never really think about the roles you mentioned yesterday, the mediators and the lawyers. I think you also mentioned that we might not always think about the lawyers, but they're an integral part in that deliberation process. So I think that's really something that people will take away.
Very good. And Bernard, when you think about the EC generally, how do you see their sort of strategic position vis-a-vis what happened in the session yesterday? Is integration becoming much more current, if you like, within EC discussions? Is it becoming a facet in project design?
I think it is, and it is absolutely necessary. I think with our new policy agenda, the European Green Deal, we realize that we won't be able to face and tackle the challenges of today
Right.
without systemic approaches and without working across sectors to promote this green transition that we are calling for. So yeah, we see it at European level. I don't say it's enough. There is a lot. It's really a mind shift across institutions and beyond institutions, across all stakeholders and civil society, private sector. It's learning to work together. It's learning indeed flexibility. It's learning to agree on common roadmaps and common objectives. So yeah, we see it with the Green Deal. We see it in our international cooperation. The purpose of this initiative was really to promote this mind shift. We see it happening, definitely. So beyond the series of pilots we are supporting through this initiative, we have seen that in a new programming phase of the EU, in all partner countries, landscape approaches feature much more prominently.
Right, yeah. I thought during the session, the small conversation that we held around complexity was very interesting, because this is often something that people find really quite intimidating. They worry about it. They feel that it results in a loss of control. What is your sense around that? Do you think that collectively we are brave enough to grasp the nettle of complexity and advance forwards?
I think also what it does is that by forcing you to think beyond your own silo, because you're realizing that the problem is complex, you are realizing that you will need to get more people on board, which means also the responsibility can be shared, right? In a sense that can also represent a relief, right? It will not require you to figure out the complex web by yourself, but you'll be able to rely on the very specific expertise of everyone else you will have to get on board. Now, that obviously requires the skills to make those connections, try and get everyone on board. But I think, especially the examples that we heard yesterday, incentivize people to think beyond their own boundaries of their topics, of their themes, because it simply showed that, well, with one intervention, we can potentially tackle a whole range of policy objectives that we have. And there's an added value in getting more colleagues on board and trying to figure out these problems in a group, right? And I truly feel that can also have that effect of relief, of knowing that we will all have to pull on the same string. And I guess in the space of a delegation, for example, or if you're working together in the same organization, at least, I would hope that the colleagues are somewhat aligned in the way that they also think about a specific project, in the way that they would like to tackle it. So potentially also the social investment that is required is not as high. Now, we never know how individuals will ultimately work out with each other, but I think to close that, I truly think that effect could also be had from realizing the complexity.
I think if I may, the colleagues indeed realize increasingly that you can't work on environmental issue from an environmental perspective exclusively, especially in our partner countries. It's feasible in some places in Europe, but in partner countries that have development priority, very basic priorities, poverty reduction and so on, you need to tackle this issue from an integrated perspective, starting with the socioeconomic needs in the place. So you need to put people at the heart of what you do at the level of the territory, and again, these landscape approaches allow us to do that. So, no, definitely very powerful tools to do that. It entails a level of complexity, definitely. I think what also was interesting to see in our conversations with the colleagues from the field, in the reality check we had in these discussions, was to see that we should not underestimate the political economy aspects behind the different aspiration and needs and requests on a particular territory. Some undermining factors also, like corruption, that can indeed lead to completely unexpected outcomes. And indeed, embedded in these approaches, you need to include adaptive management to be able to respond to unexpected factors, unexpected developments. You need time as well.
Yeah.
That's probably something we are not good at with the cycle of projects. We don't give enough time for things to happen.
Right.
But again, I think we are, through this initiative, we are sowing seeds in the minds of development practitioners, in the minds of partner institutions, of policymakers in partner countries. And that's what we hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that point there around the political economy context within which we have to implement. And I think this is also one of the aspects that is perhaps most exciting around multi-stakeholder fora, is that this is then a problem-solving, a solution-creating entity, and provided we understand that it's not merely across sectors that we want to integrate, it has to also be vertically. It's then collaboratively thinking with them, okay, we're confronted with this corruption issue, or we're confronted with this powerful politician who stands in the way of us achieving what we want to achieve. How are we going to get him or her on board, or how are we going to be able to go around them? How are we going to be able to use our networks in order to create a solution to the challenge we face? Yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I also, it's also one of the things that I reflect on quite a lot, is that when I work together with EU delegations, is that they often talk about the importance of promoting EU values and very high levels of cooperation and collaboration between the member states. And so, in many respects, this is not dissonant with that set of core values.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very true. I think, well, first, sustainability, which is at the heart of, again, our policy agenda, European Green Deal. Equity is also essential, and inclusive development, and the whole story of a just transition. I think, again, landscape approaches are about putting all stakeholders, whatever their status, around the same table, and giving everyone a voice in the analysis of what's happening on the territory, and on defining this roadmap, common roadmap on the territory. So, yes, inclusiveness, that's something we need to practice and we need to enforce. You know, that we are far behind our ambition there. But again, landscape approaches, I think, allow us to set some foundations for more inclusive development.
Yeah. I've also, with the session was also very focused on whether or not integrated landscape management might yield positive contributions to the whole climate change side of things, and I sort of sensed from a lot of the delegates that they're looking for these kinds of solutions, ones that are perhaps have perhaps greater potential than what we're already doing. And I also thought that was a very positive aspect of the session as a whole. Where do you see the EU moving in the future vis-a-vis it positioning itself in the climate change agenda and integration and development generally?
Well, I think we've already clearly positioned ourselves, right?
Yeah.
I think the EU wants or has the ambition to be the front runner in climate action globally, be that in the adaptation space or the mitigation space. I believe that through integration we can tackle both at the same time, depending on the context, depending on the specific project. But I do believe that is the goal.
Yeah.
And we will, if we establish that as our goal, and if we also take climate change and in itself to be a wicked problem, as I said yesterday, we have to then in turn accept that our solution will have to be integrated.
Yeah.
It is impossible to tackle the problem without integrating our projects.
Yeah.
Right? Across the environmental, the economic, and social spectrum.
Yeah.
This is also, what we're trying to do, where I think this is more prominent under the Nature Africa program, where we have the 3 pillars of engagement the sustainable management of natural resources, the environmental pillar, depending on the context, working on conservation, on restoration, on sustainable management of natural resources.
Mm-hmm.
The economic pillar, which is very much focused on trying to sustain and improve livelihoods, the concrete work in fighting poverty, if you will. And then the third pillar, making sure that the right governance is in place.
Yeah.
And I think that's also where, under the Landscapes for a Future program, we really have moved towards trying to articulate that much better.
Right.
How that governance pillar can really make a difference, and to some extent, how it's also one of the most important pillars, because it enables all the work on all the others, and it can actually enable the integration across those pillars. And to round it up, again, I think if we accept ourselves to be the front runner in solving the wicked problems that we're facing, the triple planetary crisis of climate change, biodiversity loss, of pollution, and if you will also of desertification, then we will have to accept that all of our interventions will need to move towards integration, even if it might seem as a daunting task to begin with.
So maybe to add that if I may, putting a bit the focus, because you started with the climate issue, and indeed it's central in our agenda. It is central in the concerns of our partner countries that are suffering the impacts of climate change. There as well, I think what is interesting is to see how these approaches can strengthen the resilience of territories and their populations. Mm-hmm. So it's increasingly clear that the resilience landscapes are linked to healthy ecosystems. Achieving food security on a particular landscape depends on getting on the same territory these agricultural production systems together with protected watersheds and these kind of things. So I think we saw a lot of interest from the colleagues working on climate change, acknowledging this. So yes, integrated landscape management leads to more resilient landscapes.
Yeah, great.